Again, whenever you and I walk into a restaurant, it's just two? Is two not enough? Are they thinking about their prospective tips? Or is there something lacking in us?
Well, considering that over half of restaurant party sizes are two people, you would think we're the problem. And it isn't just at restaurants. At the doctor's office, it was always, "So, where's mom?" And on field trips, you are often or always the only male chaperone among the parents. Are people really that confused to see a dad with his kid?
I remember one visit to Dr. Barger Jones' office, the pediatrician. You were sick enough to bring in, and the very cheery receptionist said, "Oh, I bet your wife really appreciated you filling in this morning." Biffed at the stereotype, I put on my best hard stare and said, "My wife is dead." Unfazed, the cheery receptionist continued to laugh and joke. People don't get their assumptions punctured that easily, nor do many of them realize how easily what happened to you and me might happen to them.
Growing up in the bubble of Delaware County, it seemed like to be a family meant a very specific thing. It wasn't a single dad with one kid, or grandparents raising their grandkids, or blended households, or family friends, even though I saw that a lot. But nope, it was just mom, dad, and a few kids. You know, that whole picket fence thing. But I never wanted a picket fence. I liked that you never had one put up at all.
We're still the only house on the block without a fence.
And that gave me the space to roam and wander and wonder about all the ways we fit into this surrounding world of picket fences, and about all the ways we didn't.
I've always found it confusing following the legal distinctions. If family is just about what the law allows, well, when I was married, I had my in-laws because the law said so. After your mommy died, you were still a cousin to your cousins, a niece to your aunts and uncles, a granddaughter to your maternal grandparents. But when we took regular visits to below the thumb in Michigan, you know that little thing, right? Yeah, down there. When we took those visits, what was I with my legal relationship severed? I have continued to refer to my nieces and nephews, parents-in-law, brothers and sisters-in-law as such, well, in addition to their given names. No law would back me up, I suppose, but I've needed some way to indicate that I care very much for those people. I don't apologize for those ties. I find them enriching. A divorced lady friend of mine told me I didn't get to use those labels anymore, just like her former mother-in-law required emphasis on the former. There's an abundant suspicion, in fact, by divorcees of any widower, and perhaps by divorcees of any widow, thinking that if any of the old family ties still bind, the heart can't be available to them. But that's the thing. Love has never fully been bound by the definitions of the dominant culture. What joy would there be in that? Love is not a threat when it expands, only when it contracts. Not when it blossoms anew, only when the hope for it rots on the vine, poisoning all the other growth around it. Yet I know I have it easy as a cisgender white man. I can form a new family one way or another without social sanction. That's not true of you, given your sexual orientation and gender identity. I know you want a nuclear family of your own. How do you deal with the renewed uncertainty about marriage equality? Thanks in part to he who shall not be named.
You know, I actually don't want a nuclear family. That may sound surprising considering, you know, I eventually do want kids, but the very concept of a nuclear family was created by the dominant culture. Their idea of a family was limited to that of one mother, one father, and a few kids living under the same roof. And in this idea, there are inherently strict limitations on who counts as a family. But like you said, what joy would there be in such strictness? I'm going to repeat a line you said before. Love is not a threat when it expands, only when it contracts. I think there should be bumper stickers with that. But anyways, as a queer person, my idea of what family consists of is inherently expansive. My best friends are my family, you are my family, my cat is my family, my church, my community, they're all my family, they're all my people. Yes, I do want kids someday, but they won't be living inside a white picket fence. I will need and I will want a village to not only help raise them, but to be a part of their family too. Family in and of itself has always been a shifting definition, one bound by oppressive social structures. Right now, families and communities of immigrants and people of color are being forced apart by the same people who are supposedly protecting family values. So I think it's important that we establish who we consider family and why. Who are the people you prioritize every day? With whom do you feel like you belong? For me, family is more of a feeling than anything else, one that evokes safety, belonging, trust, and love. In that sense, there is no right way to be a family, and instead of just one roadmap, there are thousands. If you had to define what family means to you, what would you say?
You know, that's funny. I was just about to ask you how you envision your family looking, say, 10 years from now. I guess I think of family based on the closeness of the emotional ties. Perhaps because of my age or the conventions I'm grounded in, I might not refer to non-nuclear members, that sounds kind of strange, as family per se, but I'm closer to some of them than to many of my blood relatives. My best friend is certainly like family. We only see each other every 6 weeks or so, but we have a rapport rooted deep in our values and our care for the struggling and the vulnerable. I do have a traditional side that takes comfort in definitions. When your mommy and I got married, she immediately took to calling my parents mom and dad, while I opted for Vern and Lorraine. I figured I only had one father and mother, but how antiquated that notion seems now, almost 30 years later, given all the different definitions of family that have become commonplace. I first brought you to the UUCM in search of community, of the proverbial village to raise my child. Your quickly developing interest in religion and spirituality bore out that choice in ways neither of us could have foreseen. But arguably, your strongest church family came with the large, robust, closely knit youth cohort you enjoyed as a teen. That cohort was so close, in fact, that I cautioned you about emotional entanglements well before they arrived. Do you see the possibility of a new church family? And I mean, well before you complete your advanced studies in religion?
Well, if there's one thing I can definitively say about family, it's that it's complicated. Those close-knit relationships from that youth group brought me comfort and belonging, as well as heartbreak and confusion, but such is adolescence and such is life. While I definitely have healthier boundaries and relationships now, I would not trade my time in that youth group for anything. It taught me, among many other things, that even when we mess up and fall short, family is there for each other. And we can learn from those mistakes, treat each other better in the future. That is one thing that I appreciate so much about UU communities, it seems, across the board. We all have our fair share of arguments and tumultuous times, and still, there is so much love. I will likely always consider my church to be a part of my family because of the sense of belonging I feel when I walk through those woods and into the space. Our church in Muncie is in the woods, for context. And I am very grateful to be able to have that feeling. A large part of the reason I fell in love with studying and experiencing religion and spirituality is because I have always been allowed to explore these things with an open and a curious mind. My family has allowed me to do so. You, on the other hand, did not get to have that opportunity. Do you think you would feel differently at all about religion or spirituality if your family did not raise you as a Christian Scientist?
That is a wonderful question, and it's one I ponder often. Given my own personality and temperament, one might suppose I'd be drawn to organized religion rather than skeptical of it. Perhaps the logical extremity of the Christian Science beliefs I was raised in, this is the short version, no death, no illness, no suffering, except as errors of human thought, led me to bounce to the other side of the religious spectrum. I tend to be hyperlogical in my thinking, and that probably gets in the way of my access to interesting religious and spiritual insights. You might recall having whimsical conversations with me around the dinner table concerning the atheist priest. I teased you about being one, and you rather pointedly responded, "No, Daddy, if there's an atheist priest, it's you." I think I coined the term because I care about a lot of concerns that typically fall under the umbrella of organized religion. But, and I say this with a big nod of exception to the UU of Muncie, for the most part, I haven't been a, quote, religious person since I was 15 years old. So atheist priest has its aspects of discomfort for me, despite my love of paradox that inspired it. In contrast with your mommy and with you, I've never fully been able to embrace a church family as much as I treasure the UUCM. I've tried to support your dreams at all times, but is it hard knowing your closest family member never closed religious ranks with you?
I'll begin this answer with a story. One day, I came to you all excited to show you a magic card trick that I had just learned. I got really into magic card tricks for a while. And when I was finished showing it to you, you immediately wanted to know how I did it. And I, in my 9 or 10-year-old brain, just thought you would be blown away by the magic. I didn't want to show you how I did it. That takes all the fun away. So yes, while there were times when I was younger, I felt a bit frustrated that you land on the more logical side of things and I the emotional, I view this difference now as a great thing. I do seem to surround myself with people who are more pragmatic than I am, and I need this. It reminds me to come back down to earth every once in a while, pay attention to what's right in front of me.
Just like you value pragmatism in others, I have gotten somewhat more comfortable with traditionally religious terms. We've spent the past few years at the UUCM rehabilitating words like worship, for instance. But I had long before determined that I would parent in sacred trust for your mommy. I didn't even have a clear sense of the term. I just knew that the parenting work ahead of me was of transcendent importance. No more good cop, bad cop. No more gendering the duties to avoid socially gendered discomfort. I could not flinch, not at anything.
Among our differences, we have always reached common ground. Some people have asked me, was it uncomfortable having to talk to your dad about things like periods? And every time I answer with an unequivocal no. I always grew up knowing that our household was not bound by the same questionable social rules as our society. Any conversation topic or issue was on the table, quite literally, because we often had our most in-depth conversations at the dinner table. And for that, I will always be grateful.
I'm glad you perceive our conversations that way. I had actually vowed to myself when I became a lone parent that I'd leave nothing off the conversational table, no matter how uncomfortable or squeamish it made me feel. And to my pleasant surprise, I found myself uncomfortable far less often than I anticipated I might be.
But you were raised in a very different way, in which any household conversation was to be kept polite and conflict-free. I know that some of your parenting developed as a reaction to what did not work in terms of how you were raised, which seems like a nearly universal feeling among many of the parents I know. What were some of the parenting differences you knew you wanted to make? And what are some of the other factors that influenced that? Was it largely an intuitive process? Did that lack of a roadmap with clear instructions concern you?
Well, I actually felt more comfortable without a clear parenting map. I knew, of course, that I wanted our relationship to be more open, not liberally sprinkled with the "thou shalt not say" of my childhood. Even before you were conceived, I felt strongly that I didn't want our parenting to be gendered, to be divided into a female domain and a male domain. Perhaps that's because some of my strengths are more classically female, and some traditionally male domains completely baffle me. I would indeed describe a lot of my parenting as intuitive. You always seemed to know when you'd had enough food, activity, interaction, conversation. So I tried to honor those limits in the hope that you would eventually do so for yourself. Truly, the only by-the-book parenting experience I recall was a pamphlet on sleep conditioning for babies when you were really, really little. And sleep conditioning proved to be an abysmal failure with you, so your mommy and I proverbially tossed that book out the window.
And while I would love to talk more about defying gender norms and intuitive parenting, time is ticking, so we'll save that for another day. So even though our society has attempted to confine family to neat little boxes, the lived reality of families is much messier, much more expansive. Today you've heard a snippet of the story of our family. Now I'd like to ask you to reflect on yours. Imagine for a moment a world where there are no limitations on who or what counts as a family, where love rather than law is the authority. If you are still searching for family, you are not alone. Many of us are. May today serve as a reminder that family is what we make of it. Maybe your family is a favorite tree in your yard, the pets you've given a home, friends who became chosen family, a liberal church community in the Midwest. The size or shape of your family doesn't matter, but rather the love within. Thank you.